Is he serious? Is he actually serious right now? Vincent Craw looked at the man standing in the doorway of his own shop, the way you look at something that has wandered into the wrong neighborhood and hasn't figured it out yet. A black man, early 40s, broad-shouldered, wearing a canvas apron over a flannel shirt, a smear of sawdust along one forearm. Behind him, shelves of hand-planed walnut boards. A half-finished dining table clamped to the workbench. Tools arranged with the precision of someone who understood that the difference between a good piece and a great one lived in details most people never noticed. Vincent said, without turning around, "We're not taking commissions right now." The man in the doorway, that was Elmore Graves, general contractor, Graves & Sons out of Cincinnati, a company that had renovated 14 schools, 3 hospitals, and a federal courthouse in the past 8 years, looked at the back of Vincent's head and said, "I'm not here for a commission. I'm here about the library project." Vincent's turned then. "The Millbrook Library? The one they're tearing down next spring," Graves said, "unless someone builds a case for saving it." Vincent had heard about Millbrook. Everyone in the city's historic preservation community had heard about it, the way you hear about a fire from 3 blocks away. The building had been commissioned in 1923 by a Gilded Age industrialist named Sewell, who had, for reasons that historians still argued about, insisted that every inch of the interior woodwork be done by hand. No factory cuts, no machine joinery. The reading room alone had taken 4 craftsmen 2 years to complete. It was, by any measure of the word, irreplaceable. The development group that wanted the site had a different word for it: expensive. "I know about Millbrook," Vincent said. "Then you know they've got a hearing in 6 weeks, Graves said. He crossed to the workbench without being invited, ran one hand along the edge of the table. Not to evaluate it, just to feel it. The way people who work with their hands touch good work. And you know the only argument that moves that kind of hearing is one that proves the original construction can't be replicated." Vincent looked at him. "And you want me to prove it can be?" Graves didn't flinch. "I want you to try. If you can match it, the preservation case collapses, and at least we know the truth. If you can't," he paused, "then the building speaks for itself." Vincent was quiet for a moment. He had been a furniture maker for 19 years. Before that, an apprentice in a shop in East Nashville that had closed when the owner died and left no one to leave it to. Before that, a kid in a 2-bedroom apartment in West Columbus who had taken apart every piece of furniture his grandmother owned, piece by piece, and put it back together just to understand how the joints worked. He had no degree, no institutional affiliation, no name that appeared in the design publications that Graves probably read at the airport. What he had was a 900-square workshop on Mechanic Street, 3 employees who had stayed through 2 slow years, and the kind of patience with wood that most people reserved for things they considered sacred. 6 weeks, Vincent said. 5.5, Graves said. The hearing's on a Thursday. Vincent looked at the half-finished table on his bench. He looked at the stack of drawings pinned above it. He looked at his hands, which were not the hands of someone who needed to prove anything. And then he thought about a building that had taken 4 men 2 years to build in 1923 and was being described in city council documents as a fiscal liability. "Send me the photographs," he said. The photographs arrived that evening. 63 of them, high-resolution scans from the Preservation Society's archive, close-ups of the reading room's panelwork, the carved capitals at the tops of the interior columns, the coffered ceiling with its interlocking geometric inlays. Vincent spread them across his workbench and stood there for a long time, not taking notes, not making sketches, just looking. His youngest employee, a 23-year-old named Tomas, who had come to the shop after dropping out of an architecture program and never left, found him there at midnight when he came back for a jacket he'd forgotten. "You're not going to sleep tonight, are you?" Tomas said. It wasn't a question. Vincent pointed at one of the photographs, a detail of the ceiling joint where 3 separate carved panels met at an angle that should not geometrically have been possible to execute cleanly by hand. "Tell me how they did that," he said. Tomas looked at it for a long time. I have no idea. Neither do I, Vincent said. Yet. The development group was called Crestline Capital, and its principal was a man named Harrison Wolf, who had, in the past decade, converted 4 historic buildings in the city into what his firm's website called mixed-use residential experiences. The buildings had been profitable. The buildings had also, in the opinion of anyone who had seen the originals, been stripped of everything that had made them worth saving in the first place. Wolf was 53, silver-haired, the kind of man who arrived at public meetings 5 minutes late, in a way that communicated he had more important places to be. He had been quoted in the city paper the previous month, saying that preserving the Millbrook Library would cost taxpayers $14 million to maintain a building that 20 people use on a Tuesday. The number was wrong. The attendance figures were wrong. The cost projection was based on a contractor estimate that the Preservation Society had disputed twice in writing. None of that had made the quote go away. Vincent read the article once, set it down, and did not read it again. He had work to do. The problem with replicating the Millbrook interior wasn't the skill required. Vincent had been cutting hand joinery since he was 17. The problem was the wood itself. The original craftsman had used American chestnut, a species that had been effectively eliminated by blight in the 1930s, leaving behind a handful of salvaged boards and a reputation that bordered on mythology among woodworkers. The grain was finer than oak. The figure was different from anything that had survived in quantity. To replicate the work accurately, you needed to find chestnut that had been milled before the blight hit and had spent the last 90 years doing what old wood does when it's stored properly, settling, drying, becoming the thing it was always going to be. Vincent made 8 phone calls in 3 days. He found it on the 4th day, through a retired millworker in Kentucky named Prentice, who had been storing 14 boards under his barn since 1987 and had been waiting, he said, for someone who'd actually know what to do with them. Vincent drove to Kentucky on a Wednesday morning and drove back on Thursday afternoon, with the boards in the bed of his truck, covered in canvas, secured with straps he'd checked 4 times at every gas station. He started cutting on Friday. What happened in the next 5 weeks was the kind of work that doesn't translate well into language, because language moves forward, and this work moved in every direction at once. There were days when a single joint took 6 hours and came out wrong and had to be started again. There were nights when Tomas and a second employee named Ferris stayed past 10, not because Vincent asked them to, but because the thing they were building had started to feel like something larger than a commission, larger than a demonstration, something that had its own gravity. Graves stopped by twice. He didn't say much. He looked, and the looking was enough. On the 4th week, Harrison Wolf published a second statement. His communications team had been thorough. The statement mentioned that the preservation effort was being led by a local furniture maker with no formal preservation credentials, that the effort was well-intentioned but amateurish, and that the city council should rely on the assessments of qualified professionals rather than craftsmen working in a personal capacity. The statement did not mention Vincent by name. It didn't need to. Tomas found it and showed it to Vincent on a Tuesday morning. Vincent read it, set his phone face down on the bench, picked up his chisel, and went back to work. 3 days later, a journalist named Keeley, from the city's arts and culture publication, came to the shop. She had heard about the project through Graves, who had said only that there was something worth seeing on Mechanic Street. Keeley had covered the preservation beat for 6 years. She had attended the public hearing where Wolf had given his statement. She had, by her own account, come to the shop expecting to write a small piece about a craftsman making a valiant, futile attempt. She stayed for 4 hours. She watched Tomas hand-cut a rosette that matched, to the millimeter, one of the original capitals from the 1923 reading room. She watched Vincent fit a panel joint that required the alignment of 7 separate angled cuts, with no mechanical assistance, no laser guide, Nothing except the marks he'd made by hand and the understanding of wood that came from 19 years of attention. She watched Ferris apply a finish to a test board and hold it next to a photograph of the original and say, quietly, "I think we've got it." She asked Vincent why he was doing this. He was quiet for a moment, in the way of someone who has thought about the answer enough that the words have worn smooth. "Because someone built that room in 1923 and put 19 years of learning into every square foot of it," he said. "And if no one bothers to find out whether it can be matched, the people making the decision get to pretend there's nothing special to lose." Keeley published the piece on a Thursday morning. It ran with photographs that her editor almost didn't approve because they looked, the editor said, too beautiful to be real. Close-ups of the replication work, the joint, the rosette, the fanel surface that had taken Vincent 11 days to bring to a state that matched the original's century-old patina. The piece did not go quietly. By noon, it had been shared across 3 preservation networks. By evening, 2 national architecture publications had picked it up. By the following morning, it had reached an audience that no one in the Millbrook conversation had anticipated: woodworkers and architects and building historians, and people who had never heard of the library and would have been unable to locate it on a map, sharing it with the specific urgency of people who had recognized something true and did not want it to be ignored. The comments were immediate, and they were not ambivalent. "This man just proved in 5 weeks what those developers have been denying for 2 years. Someone needs to get this in front of the council. I walked past that library every day as a kid. This is the first time I've understood what we're about to lose. Find this shop. Support this work." Graves called Vincent the morning the piece came out. "Your phone is going to ring a lot today," he said. "Already has," Vincent said. "How do you feel?" Vincent looked at the replication panel, which was leaning against the wall of his shop, finished, waiting for the hearing. "Like I need to build the second one," he said. "We've got a month, and the council will want to see more than one piece. You've got 5 weeks, Graves said. 4.5, Vincent said. "Hearings on a Thursday." Harrison Wolf's response came 48 hours after the article. A longer statement, this time, more carefully worded, acknowledging the obvious skill of the craftsman involved while reframing the core argument. The question, the statement said, was not whether the work could be replicated by a dedicated individual working in isolation, but whether the city has resources to sustain an ongoing restoration program at institutional scale. The Millbrook Library needed not one craftsman, but a permanent, funded, staffed preservation infrastructure that simply does not exist. It was, as arguments went, more sophisticated than the first one. It was also in the specific way that certain arguments are sophisticated, almost worse for being so. Because it was designed not to refute what Vincent had done, but to move the goalpost far enough away that what he'd done would no longer matter. Keeley read it and called Vincent. "He's not wrong that the infrastructure question is real," she said. "No," Vincent agreed. "He's not wrong about that. So what do you do?" Vincent was quiet for a moment. "I've got 4 names," he said. "People who trained the same way I did, who are currently working within 50 miles of this city, who could staff a restoration program at Millbrook for a decade without breaking a sweat." He paused. "I just need someone to ask them," Keeley asked them. They said yes, all 4. 2 of them drove to Vincent's shop that weekend and looked at the replication work and said nothing. For a long time, the way people are silent when they're inside something they respect. One of them, a woman named Carolyn, who had spent 20 years restoring historic interiors in the mid-Atlantic states, looked at the joint Vincent had cut for the column capital and said, "I've been doing this since before you were born, and I would have been pleased to make that." Vincent said, "I had a good teacher." "Who?" she asked. He pointed at the stack of photographs on his bench. "Whoever did it first." The city council hearing was held on a Thursday morning in March in a room that seated 80 and held, by the time the session began, somewhere closer to 120. People stood along the walls. A local public radio station had a recorder running. Two architecture students from the state university had driven 3 hours and were sitting on the floor near the door. Vincent came in with Graves, carrying 2 pieces. The replication panel and the rosette, wrapped in cloth, because old habits die hard and good work deserves to be carried carefully. He set them on the table at the front of the room and unwrapped them without ceremony. The council members leaned forward. Harrison Wolf sat 3 rows back in a charcoal blazer, a legal pad open on his knee, a pen moving in small, controlled circles. His expression was neutral in the particular way that people practice neutrality when they know they're being watched. The Preservation Society's lead speaker presented first. 40 minutes of documentation, cost comparisons, attendance data, architectural history. It was thorough and necessary. Freffany and the room listened the way people listen to things that are thorough and necessary, with attention and without emotion. Then they asked Vincent to speak. He stood at the front of the room for a moment and looked at the council. 7 people, a range of ages, the kind of faces that have heard many things and retain the capacity to be surprised by fewer and fewer of them. He didn't bring notes. "I'm not an architect," he said. "I don't have a preservation credential. I have a shop on Mechanic Street and 19 years of cutting wood by hand." He gestured toward the 2 pieces on the table. "What's in front of you is a section of the Millbrook Library's interior, replicated as accurately as I could manage. I want you to look at it, not at me. At it." A pause. The room looked. "The question in front of you isn't whether this building is worth saving," he said. "You know it is. The question is whether the cost of saving it is real or whether it's been made to look larger than it is." He turned slightly toward the table where his pieces were displayed. "These took me and 2 other people just under 6 weeks. The craftsman who built the original took 2 years because they were building a full room from scratch with no photographs to reference." He looked back at the council. "The work can be done. The people to do it exist. What that requires from this city is the decision that it's worth doing." He sat down. The room was quiet for approximately 4 seconds. Then someone in the back started clapping, not performatively, not to make a point, the way someone will clap at a political meeting to signal their position. The kind of clapping that happens before the decision to clap has been made. 2 people around them joined in, then a cluster, then the room. Harrison Wolf did not clap. He sat in his chair and looked at the pieces on the table, with the expression of a man who is running very fast calculations and not finding the result he expected. Graves, sitting 2 rows behind him, watched his face the way you watch a weather system. He had worked in this city for 20 years, and he had sat in many rooms like this one, and he knew, in the specific way that people know things when they have been paying attention long enough, that something had just shifted. The vote was 4-3 to delay demolition pending a formal preservation assessment. Not a victory. Not yet. But a door that had been closing had stopped. Outside the council building, Graves found Vincent on the front steps, rewrapping the pieces. "They'll appeal," Graves said. "Probably," Vincent agreed. "Wolf's team will commission a counter-assessment from a firm they've worked with before. Most likely." Graves watched him fold the cloth around the panel with the care of someone who understood what it had cost to make it. "You're not worried?" Vincent looked up. "I'm not unworried," he said. "But Carolyn and the other 3 have already agreed to be named as part of the restoration proposal. They've got combined resumes that go back 40 years and institutional relationships that Wolf's counter-assessment isn't going to touch." He set the panel down against the wall. "I built the argument in wood. They'll build it in language. It needed both." Graves was quiet for a moment. He had a habit of being quiet in a specific way when he was deciding whether to say the next thing. "I want to be honest with you," he said. "When I first came to your shop, I didn't come because I thought you were the right person for this." Vincent looked at him. "I came because you were available and local, and you had photographs of your work onto a website that I could verify in 20 minutes. He paused. "I thought you'd do competent work that would document the problem clearly enough for the hearing. I thought the argument would live in the documentation, and you'd be a footnote in it." Vincent said nothing. I was wrong, Graves said simply, about what the work would say, and about what you knew, and about why you were the right person for this. He picked up the second piece, held it for a moment. I want you to know I'm aware of that. It was, Vincent thought, the most useful kind of apology, the kind that doesn't ask for anything in return. I appreciate you saying it, he said. They stood there on the front steps of the council building while the crowd thinned around them, people returning to their cars and their offices and their Tuesday mornings. A woman who had been standing inside near the door came out and stopped in front of Vincent. She was older, late 60s, dressed simply, with the particular self-possession of someone who has stopped caring what impression she makes and has found that liberating. My father worked on that building, she said. He was 17. He was one of 4 men on the reading room ceiling, and he talked about it for the rest of his life. She stopped. He died in 2011, and I never thought I'd hear anyone talk about it the way you talked about it in there. She looked at the wrapped panel under his arm. Can I see it? Vincent unwrapped it without a word and held it for her. She looked at it for a long time, the way people look at things that connect them to someone they have been missing. Then she nodded once, as if the wood had confirmed something. He would have said it was right, she said. She turned and walked down the steps without looking back. Vincent rewrapped the panel. Graves had said nothing. There was nothing to say. The formal preservation assessment took 11 weeks. The counter-assessment Wolf commissioned arrived 3 weeks after that, and disputed 2 of its conclusions, while conceding the central one, which was that the original construction represented a level of craftsmanship that could not be economically replicated at scale by industrial methods, which meant that the building's value was not replaceable, which meant that the demolition argument required a stronger justification than site economics alone. The council voted again 6 months later. 5-2. The Millbrook Library was designated a protected historic structure. Vincent was not in the room for the second vote. He was in his shop on Mechanic Street, cutting the first piece of a dining table commissioned by a couple in Hyde Park who had seen the article and had spent 3 months on the waiting list. Tomas was at the bench beside him, working on a joint he'd been practicing for 2 weeks and had finally gotten right that morning. Ferris was in the back, bringing a finish coat to a set of shelves that would go into a house in Kenwood. The call came from Graves at 11:14 in the morning. 5-2, he said. Good, Vincent said. That's it. Vincent looked at the piece on his bench, the grain of the wood under the shop light, the line of the cut. It was always going to be about the work, he said. The vote just makes it official. There was a pause. Carolyn wants to know if you'll consult on the restoration team, Graves said. They're assembling the proposal for the city. They want your name on it. Send me the paperwork, Vincent said. He hung up and went back to cutting. Tomas looked up from his bench. Good news. The library's staying, Vincent said. Tomas nodded, went back to his joint, tried it, found it clean, set it down. Good, he said. Just that. Outside, Mechanic Street was doing what it always did. Traffic, noise, the particular density of a city that doesn't slow down for things it hasn't noticed yet. The shop smelled of wood and finish, and the specific clean dust of careful cutting. The light through the front window fell across the floor in a long rectangle that shifted imperceptibly through the morning. 3 months after the vote, a journalist from a national publication asked Harrison Wolf for a comment on the Millbrook outcome. His response, relayed through a spokesperson, was 4 sentences. He wished the preservation effort well. He remained committed to responsible urban development. He had the highest respect for skilled artisans. He had no further comment at this time. It was, as statements go, exactly what you'd expect. What nobody expected, including Graves, was the letter that arrived at Vincent's shop on a Wednesday morning 6 weeks after that. No letterhead. Handwritten, 3 paragraphs on plain paper. Wolf's name at the bottom. It said that he had been in the council room on the day of the first hearing, that he had looked at the 2 pieces on the table, that he had understood, standing in that room, something he had not understood before, about what it meant to replace something that could not be replaced, and that he had spent the months since then deciding whether that understanding changed anything he owed to anyone. He said it changed what he owed to Vincent. He did not say he was a different man. He did not say he had learned something. He said, in the plain language of someone choosing words with care, that he had built his career on the argument that nothing was irreplaceable, because that argument made everything transactional, and transactional was something he knew how to win. He said that the work on that table had made the argument impossible to sustain, and that he had known it the moment he looked at it, and that he had kept talking anyway because that was the easier thing to do. He said he was sorry. He said he knew what that was and wasn't worth. Then he said he was making a contribution to the Millbrook Restoration Fund in an amount sufficient to cover 2 years of the craftsman's stipends. No conditions. No naming rights. No acknowledgement requested. Vincent read the letter twice, folded it, set it on his bench. He didn't tell anyone about it for 3 days. Not Tomas, not Graves, not Keeley. He went on cutting. He went on planing and fitting and checking joints and adjusting finishes. He thought about the letter the way you think about things that land in unexpected places, not fitting into any category you already have, requiring you to make a new one. On the 4th day, he called Graves. "Did you know about the letter?" he asked. A pause. "What letter, never mind," Vincent said. He was quiet for a moment, looking at the bench, at the grain of the work in front of him. "He did it right," he said finally. "The letter, the way he said it. He didn't ask for anything." "People surprise you," Graves said. "Some of them," Vincent said. "Some of them." 6 months after the vote, the restoration work at Millbrook began. Carolyn led the team. 3 of the 4 craftsmen Vincent had identified were on it. The work was scheduled to take 18 months. The reading room would go last, because the reading room was where the hardest work lived. Vincent visited on a Saturday in October, when the first section of the east wall had been stripped back to the original structure, and the scope of what had survived was visible for the first time in decades. He stood in the middle of the room and looked up at the ceiling, at the interlocking panels that had taken 4 men 2 years to build in 1923, and had then sat there for 100 years, gathering the light of 1,000 ordinary afternoons, carrying the weight of a cities that had almost decided they didn't matter. Carolyn came to stand beside him. "Your father's colleague did that joint," Vincent said, pointing to the corner where 3 panels met at the impossible angle he had first seen in the photographs. "I still don't entirely know how. My father would have known," she said. "I know," he said. "That's the point." They stood there for a while in the room that someone had decided was worth saving, in the silence that fills spaces when the people inside them understand what they're standing in. Outside, through the tall windows, the city continued. Indifferent, enormous, full of things being built and things being torn down. Full of decisions being made by people who had decided, for one reason or another, what was worth keeping and what wasn't. Somewhere in it, in a shop on Mechanic Street, 2 people were cutting joints by hand and learning, the way you only learn by making things, what it costs to do something right. The work is always the argument. The vote just makes it official.